When you do genealogy long enough, you'll soon find information about family in places you never would have expected. I mean, I did an episode on finding a thing from my ancestor on eBay, which I actually have up on my wall right over here. But this one is a little bit different because a cousin of mine, a distant cousin, as it turns out, was a Holocaust survivor and wrote a book on his surviving the Holocaust. And this was a branch of the family I knew nothing about. I didn't even know they existed until I started browsing through some of the Yad Vashem pages of testimony and things like that. But as it turns out, he didn't quite write the book himself. No, he actually ghost wrote it through a man named John Munro in Vancouver, Canada. And he basically sat down for hours upon hours upon hours and told his story to John Munro, who then compiled it into a book detailing his story from beginning in the village of Wasilkow, Poland, all the way through his horrific experience in the Holocaust. As it turns out, the Vancouver Holocaust Education Centre still had tapes from this original interview, and they were so kind to send me all the tapes which had been digitized. They sent it to me in a big zip file, and I've really just been listening through as many of them as I can. Now, a lot of them go into really horrific details about Michel's experience with the Holocaust, but what I want to focus on here is the stuff about the Mielnicki family, because this is where all the uncovered details about my ancestors came through. To give a little bit about my background, my great-grandmother, Rose Minick, came to the United States in the 1900s, and she soon thereafter married a man named Louis Paley, who was my great-grandfather as well, and they lived in Albany, New York. Now, Rose had quite a number of brothers. She was the only girl in her family, and I thought that pretty much all the brothers came over to America, but as it turns out, this was not the case, because Michel Mielnicki, his father, was named Chaim Mielnicki, and he stayed behind in Poland. And how did I find out that Chaim was a brother to my family? Well, you just have to listen to his words to find that out.
In 1908, from what you said in your other interviews, 5 of your father's brothers plus a sister and your grandmother emigrated to the United States.
Yes, they emigrated to the United States.
Tell me about your uncles and your aunt in the United States. Do you know any of their names?
Oh, they changed the name from Mielnicki to Minick.
Minick?
From Mielnicki to Minick. Only one, yeah. M-I-N-I-C-K.
Where did they settle? In Detroit? Did you?
No, they settled in Albany.
Albany, New York.
So how cool is that? He literally reveals in the interview that the family went under the name Minick and lived in upstate New York, which is exactly what my Minick family did. They came to America under the last name Mielnicki or Mielnicki, which is one is the more Polish pronunciation of the name, and then they changed their last name to Minick. And as it turns out, Michel was actually in contact with some of these brothers, and in fact, when I went through a lot of the old documents that I found in my uncle's house, I actually came across a bar mitzvah invitation list for my father. And on the list, as it turns out, Michel Mielnicki was invited. He also gave some details about my great-great-grandmother, Liba Fredel, or Alti Levin, and when exactly she died.
Oh, by the way, talking about the parents, is my father's mother died an American in 1939 on the second day of Easter.
This enabled me to figure out when she died. I was able to find her gravestone and also obtain her death certificate, which didn't really give me any other details about her family, but what he says in this interview is that she died on Easter. And yes, the day he gives is a little bit off, but this was true. She died on Easter, and from this I was able to figure out from both records I had found and also just the knowledge of the date, I was able to find her death certificate. Now, Chaim, Michel's father, was one of the younger brothers in the family, but as it turns out, the oldest brother also never came to America, and Michel talks about him as well in the interviews.
There were two brothers, that is your father and one of the other brothers, who didn't go to the United States. What was the situation with the other brother?
He was always sick.
He was sick as well.
Yeah. And he had two boys and two girls.
Mm-hmm.
My father's brother that stayed with him. Now here we have the Mielnicki is the oldest son from my father's brother was Joske, and then the wife was Kele.
He mentions the fact that he was pretty sickly and was suffering for some time, but he had a bunch of kids. And this really matched up with what I had found in records. Originally, he calls him Shmulke for a long time, but I knew that this was not his actual name. His name was actually Yussel Hertz. And later on in the interview, he in fact reveals that his name was Yussel, or Yuska. So this was a really nice little bit of information that helped to cement what I had already found in the records. There's also a really common naming pattern in my Mielnicki or Minick family of people named Aron. And this was because my great-great-grandfather, who never came to America because he died in Poland, was named Aron. But as it turns out, he actually had a slightly different nickname that he went under.
And their grandfather and my grandfather, I find out the name is Archik.
How do you spell that?
A-R-C-Z-I-K. Archik.
And that means the same as Aaron, does it?
It's the same thing, but this is mainly in a diminutive, probably, or something like that. Archik, they call it.
Archik.
So this is, I would never remember, if not that I would never remember the name of my grandparents.
So this is a diminutive version of the name Aron, and Michel postulates when he may have died. At first he thinks it was shortly after he was born in the 20s, then he realizes it was a lot earlier. I was actually able to figure out from naming patterns that he died a lot earlier than even Michel realized. And this is simply because of the fact that in Jewish Ashkenazi naming patterns, you don't name people after living people most of the time, only after they're deceased. And so we have our own Mielnickis being born in the 1890s, which means that Aron, my great-great-grandfather, probably died around 1895 to 1896, that time period. But I have not been able to find his death record. I was also able to add another entry to my family tree for actually a really sad story of Michel's little brother who was born at 7 months and died just 2 days after his birth. And his family buried them, and, well, I'll just let you hear the rest of the story.
Did I ever tell you this story in 1939 that my mother gave birth to a fourth child? I will be very brief because this is something that it happened 1 in a million. I don't think it ever happened to anybody. My mother gave birth to a boy in the 7 months, and the boy lived only 2 days and didn't survive. I remember the little boy in this little bassinet, and the boy died. So the rabbi come home and make all the blessing and made this ritual and they took the carriage with the wagon, the carriage and the horse with the rabbi, and they went to bury at the cemetery. The cemetery was occupied by the Polish army, and their training already was just before war. Their training of shooting and all kind of things. They just choose the cemetery to with bullets and things like that, and they didn't let them in. So you're going to get killed. We don't guarantee your life. You can't get in. So they had to make a demi-tour, 180 degrees, and they had to go all the other side of the city where 300-year-old cemeteries and bury there. And these were not far from some villages. And they went and they made all the prayers and they buried this little boy, the little child. And 2 days later, a Polish peasant came to us home and said, Panie Mielnicki, Sir Mielnicki, said, Polish peasant thought that you're burying some gold for the war. And they went and they digged out and they realized it's a child. So they left it and they ran away. So my father had to go back and take the rabbi. You imagine how devastated he was, my father, how they could do a thing like that, these savages. Real savages. and he had to take the rabbi, go again there all the way, and then rebury it.
These interviews are incredible because they give tremendous insight into his life in Vasilkow, as well as, of course, the town's experience with the Holocaust. But he also gets into a lot of really personal details, some of which are a little bit lascivious.
I think the most beautiful thing in the world is a nude woman, especially if she's well built. Of course, in the old days, she had to be a little bit more plumpy than today, otherwise she would be too thin. But this is the most beautiful, appreciate creature of God is a nude woman. And I had an encounter with as a small child because I had a book of gynecologist or obstetrician, and it showed a lot of naked women and childbirth and things like that. So I developed a kind of a liking.
I mean, you really get a good sense of who this person is, where he came from, and I was able to confirm a lot of things I had found about my family, and this is only with listening to a fraction of the tapes. I hope to get through the rest of them in the coming months. I think most of it probably deals with the Holocaust, so he's not really talking much anymore about life in Wasilkow, but you never know, there might be some other gems hidden in these. So it just goes to show, like, you never know what you're going to find for your family. I want you to let me know in the comment section below, what is the most unexpected place you've ever learned something about your family? I mean, it can be something online or in an old book, anything like that. Let me know. Be sure to follow me on social media. Hit the like, subscribe. Thank you so much. We're getting close to 1,000 subscribers. I'll see you in the next one.